Klaus Bekker, Mallorca, The Tears of the Giant. This time, Uncle Theo had put everything on one card. The explosives he had smuggled into Mallorca were carefully placed in the corner of the cave. Well, he was, of course, no expert on explosives. In fact, his knowledge about explosions came from the internet. But somehow, everything would work out. And with a bit of luck, he would be rich soon. He took cover behind a large rock in the cave, which should offer him some protection. Then the time had come. He pressed the trigger, and with a loud bang and a big cloud of dust, the rock face in front of him collapsed. Unfortunately, he had used way too many explosives, because now there was a crunching sound in the ceiling, and before he could get to safety, the roof of the cave collapsed on top of him. Everything went black due to the toxic smoke the explosion had caused. Somehow, he managed with his last strength to make it outside, lay down on his back, breathing heavily, before finally losing consciousness. There, a few fishermen found him and quickly took him to the nearest hospital. At the same time in Cologne, Fabio was having some issues too. He stood breathing heavily and sweating in the middle of a sports hall, wearing boxing gloves, while a few other kids watched him. Some of them were even grinning quite mockingly. Next to him stood his coach, and in front of him hung a punching bag to train his punching power. Fabio was quite tall and strong for his age. He considered himself a pretty good fighter, not that he had actually fought for real yet. Apart from a little shoving on the schoolyard, there was nothing, and that was years ago. But he liked watching action movies, and he also secretly dreamed of one day rescuing his friends from a tricky situation, maybe even saving them spectacularly and courageously like his favorite movie heroes. That's why he signed up for boxing training. And now? Now he didn't even dare to hit a sandbag. They called it strike inhibition, actually something quite normal. Many can't bring themselves to just start hitting, and the peace-loving Fabio was definitely one of them. But right now, in front of the trainer and his classmates, it was just plain embarrassing. One last try, he raised his fists. But when he wanted to strike, his hands just wouldn't obey him. With tears in his eyes, he ran out of the hall, hearing the laughter of the other children. An action hero, Fabio was now sure, was definitely not inside him. In Aunt Virginia's antique shop, there was a lot of excitement later in the afternoon when Klaus, Hanna and Fabio met there. Fabio hadn't yet talked about his training, which had gone horribly wrong in his opinion. But at the moment, there was much more important news. Uncle Theo was in the hospital in Mallorca. Apparently he was in pretty bad shape. Someone had to check on him immediately, preferably today. However, there were two quite big problems. Firstly, all flights to Mallorca were fully booked, and even if there were seats available, no one could get Aunt Virginia on a plane. Her fear of flying had stopped her all her life from just getting on a plane and taking off. The last time she tried was almost 25 years ago, and she got so panicked that the captain had to make an emergency landing. Since then, trains and ships have been her only means of transportation. But now, someone really had to check on Theo quickly. Traveling by land to Mallorca could take almost 2 days. Luckily, Hanna had an idea. She reached for her smartphone. "Hi, Daddy, it's me," she chirped. At Cologne Bonn Airport, there are 3 areas. The public one, where you can take a flight to the wide world as a passenger. The military one, which you can't access because the German army's planes are stationed there. And the freight area. In this freight area, Hanna's father, Richard Lorenz, had his business headquarters. And what was even more important, his own airplane was here. It was a twin-engine Antonov, a very reliable cargo plane, painted in Hanna's favorite color, burgundy. As always, Richard beamed when he saw his daughter. He spread his arms wide, and Hanna practically flew into them. After a long hug, he also greeted Klaus and Fabio. He, of course, knew his daughter's best friends, and apparently, Hanna had already told him what it was all about. "So, you want to head over to Mallorca as quickly as possible? Going to have some fun?" "Dad?" Hanna's indignant look was, of course, feigned. Just as Dad Richard's question wasn't serious. He knew he could trust his daughter, and she could do something else. Wrap him around her finger as always. "Well, I have to go to Mallorca tomorrow to pick up cargo from Morocco, and on the way back to Germany I could pick you up again. How about that?" Hanna slightly grimaced. "Dad, we need to go there immediately." And then she put on her sweetest face, a look she knew her father could never resist. "Please?" Richard sighed. "All right. I'll quickly refuel the plane, and then we can go." Immediately, Hanna threw her arms around his neck. "You're the best." A few hours later, they all landed in Mallorca. Richard had to attend to his business, but Hanna had been on the island with him many times before. She would find her way. Still, he reminded her, no parties. "And if there's anything," he held up his smartphone, "I'll be there in 5 minutes." "No problem, Dad. We're just going to the beach for a bit and then staying at the hotel. We'll be careful." But as soon as he was out of sight, Hanna hailed a taxi. The three of them got in, and Klaus pulled out a note with an address. "To the Municipal Hospital in Palma, please." The driver nodded and sped off. At the hospital, Uncle Theo looked really battered, scratches all over his face, and his eyes were heavily bandaged. The doctor, who was just visiting him, spoke very good German with a slight Spanish accent. "You were very lucky. That's what happens when you play with explosives." Klaus couldn't believe his ears. Had the doctor just said something about explosives? But he couldn't think about it for long, because the doctor had now finished his examination. "As far as her eyesight is concerned, unfortunately, I don't have good news. We did what we could. We just have to wait and see if her retina regenerates on its own. And if not," Uncle Theo had to swallow. "If not, then she will likely remain blind forever. I'm sorry I don't have a better prognosis. I'll leave you to your visitors for now and check in again later." With that, he left the hospital room. Klaus approached the bed. "Hello, Uncle Theo. Did the doctor just mention something about explosives?" "Well," Uncle Theo was clearly uncomfortable with the topic. "So, it might be that a tiny explosion?" He continued to stall until Klaus got fed up. "Did you plant a bomb?" "No, of course not. I just wanted to get rid of some walls in a cave. I wanted to find something." "And what? Did you lose something?" Now Fabio was curious too, and Hanna couldn't contain herself any longer. "Don't make us drag it out of you." Uncle Theo sat up in his bed. Although most of his face was covered by a bandage, you could still see he was turning a bit red. The whole situation was visibly uncomfortable for him. "All right, if you really wanted to know, I was looking for a giant." When an adult says something like that, you usually know as a kid that he's either joking or has lost his marbles, or both. But with Uncle Theo, as the kids had long learned, you had to take it seriously. So they didn't say a word, just waited for him to continue. "So the thing is, I have information that there's a giant living here in Mallorca, and he's been here for over 100 years. Somewhere in the cave systems by the sea. He's hiding from people there." Dead silence in the hospital room. But Klaus didn't give up. "You'd think a giant would be easy to find?" Now Uncle Theo was wide awake. "Usually yes, but not this one. He's holed up in the caves, and I thought, with 1 or 2 well-placed explosions, I might wake him up and lure him out." "And why do you need a giant?" "Dear Klaus, you have the heart of a true explorer. You asked the right questions, so I had done some research in old writings and the stories passed down by the locals here. And, well, it's not about the giant himself, but about his tears. When a giant cries, wherever his tears hit the ground, beautiful diamonds grow, big, clear, and flawless. And especially valuable, of course." Hanna could hardly believe it. Once again, Theo had put himself in danger just because he was after a treasure, or in this case, diamonds. "No one can have anything against a little wealth, right? And besides, I was hot on its trail." "How so?" Klaus was now determined to squeeze every bit of information out of Theo that he had. Maybe he could save his eyesight that way. "Well, my boy, reach under the bed and give me my bag. The big one." Klaus bent down and found the bag, but he needed Fabio's help to lift it and carefully place it on Uncle Theo's bed. Theo opened the bag and took something out. A brush, a very large one, almost a meter long. Uncle Theo held it triumphantly in his hand. "Here, I found this in the cave. It's a giant's toothbrush. I'm on its trail." The three kids looked at the brush. What Theo said could be true, or, as so often, complete nonsense. Hanna did a quick calculation. If that's a toothbrush, then the owner is about 5 meters tall. "More like 6 meters, yeah?" said Uncle Theo. "For a real giant? That's not very big. And he's supposed to be around 100 years old, which is not particularly old for a giant. Do you believe me now?" Hanna looked at Fabio, and actually neither of them believed a single word. Meanwhile, Klaus had grabbed the brush, and then it happened. Klaus's unique gift of being able to see things from the past like a film before his inner eye was activated. With the brush in his hand, he saw the images first a little blurry, then they were crystal clear. Klaus could now see the giant very clearly, and in front of him stood a few people. Many of them had their eyes covered just like Uncle Theo now. From the people's old-fashioned clothing, he could estimate that his vision was around 100 years old. And then it happened. The giant began to cry, but his tears did not turn into diamonds. Instead, they were carefully and cautiously collected by the people. They took the liquid and applied it to the eyes of the sick. And in a few seconds, their eyes were healed again. They laughed happily or also cried with joy. The giant's tears could heal sick or injured eyes. Just as quickly as his vision had come, it disappeared again. Klaus's friends and even Uncle Theo were already familiar with this. It was best not to bother Klaus while he was still kind of in a trance. And when Klaus woke up, he exclaimed happily, "Uncle Theo, I think I know how we can heal you!" Then he recounted what he had seen. On one hand, Uncle Theo was naturally a bit disappointed that it wasn't about valuable diamonds. On the other hand, he was simultaneously delighted. Maybe he could still get out of this whole affair unscathed. The children, in any case, were determined to find the giant. Uncle Theo spoke of all the clues he had found and handed them all his documents. He had found the most important clue just a few days ago. It read, "Search in the dragon's mouth." The children decided to go to the hotel first and then deliberate there on how to proceed. Because searching in a dragon's mouth sounded adventurous, but also quite dangerous, right? Upon arriving at the hotel, Klaus immediately went online to find out if there were any clues about the dragon's maw. Meanwhile, Hanna was busy with something else. She had already noticed that Fabio was acting differently today. Normally, he was cheerful, adventurous, and rarely at a loss for words. Today, however, he was quiet and withdrawn. While Klaus browsed various websites, she sat down next to Fabio. "Come on, tell me, what's going on with you?" At first, Fabio didn't want to open up, but it was hard for anyone, even himself, to refuse Hanna's request. So he told her how he had completely failed during boxing training. "What if I'm actually a big coward?" "What nonsense! I don't know anyone as brave as you." "But I might not even be able to protect you and Klaus if things get tough. Listen to me, Fabio. When things get tough, there's no one I'd rather have by my side than you. And in fact, it's not particularly brave to just start swinging whenever you feel like it. True bravery is being there when it gets dangerous. And you've always done that, so all good now." Fabio didn't respond, but he had to smile. As always, Hanna managed to make him feel better. That was somehow Hanna's magic power. In her presence, one always felt good. Klaus had not noticed any of this, as he was too deeply engrossed in his search for the dragon. Finally, he found something. Triumphantly, he exclaimed, "Here it is." There really is a dragon cave in Mallorca. Where is it? Hanna knew her way around the island quite well from her many visits to Mallorca. In Porto Cristo. That's not far, we can leave right away. And so Klaus, Hanna, and a now cheerful Fabio set out to search for a dragon. The entrance to the dragon cave of Porto Cristo is very close to the coast. It is quite popular with tourists. That is why Klaus was not sure if he would really find anything that no one had discovered yet. But still, it couldn't hurt to take a look around here. What the kids did not notice was the fact that they were being watched very closely by 3 men. These 3 men were Germans, and known to some vacationers as the singing group Die Hermanos. Mallorca was a party island, and was especially famous for the many party singers who lived here and performed in the bars and discos. There were a few very good ones among them, who were also famous in Germany for good reason. There were also a few quite mediocre ones, and there was a bunch of really bad singers here. And then there were the three hermanos, by far the worst singers on the island. But singing was not the main source of income for the three men from Germany. Rather, they had long specialized in burglaries, theft, and other shady activities. They also knew the legend of the giant and his tears, which were supposed to turn into diamonds. That's how they noticed Uncle Theo. Apparently he was very close to finding the giant. Now that he was in the hospital, they were tailing his three young friends. Maybe they would lead them to the giant, right? Then they could somehow neutralize the three little ones, get rid of them, and then become incredibly rich. A proper plan, as you quickly noticed, the three brothers did not have. But they were determined enough to cause trouble. But Klaus, Hanna and Fabio had no inkling of this when they entered the cave. In the dragon cave itself, known to the locals as Cuevas del Drach, there was plenty to see. One of the largest underground lakes in Europe, for example, which was over 100 meters long, as well as a lot of stalagmites and stalactites, which rose from the ground or hung from the ceiling. Also, the beautiful turquoise baths of Diana. Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt, is said to have enjoyed relaxing in hidden places and secluded lakes, just like at Lake Martel, which is surrounded by bizarre rock formations and fascinating light effects. Concerts were even held down here. If the children had had more time, they would certainly have stayed here longer. Unfortunately, there was no trace of a dragon to be seen anywhere. Luckily, they had Hanna with them, who was very talented with languages and spoke quite good Spanish, in addition to her native German and English. She quickly got into conversation with one of the women working as tourist guides down here, and indeed the lady knew that there really was something like a dragon in Mallorca. It was preserved in a museum, more precisely in the Museo Diocesa in Palma. Hanna didn't need to know any more. She gave her friends a sign and they quickly left the cave again. Outside, the three hermanos were still waiting for the children. They remained determined not to let them out of sight and to strike at the right moment. Therefore, they followed them at a safe distance. The Museo Diocesa is located in Mallorca's capital, Palma de Mallorca, specifically right behind the Cathedral La Seu, an impressive Gothic structure that became a symbol of the city. Nearby, one can also find the Royal Palace, La Almudaina, a historic palace that once served as the residence of the Mallorcan kings. And of course, the Parc de la Mar, a picturesque park with an artificial lake, offering a splendid view of the cathedral. The three children had no trouble finding the museum entrance, bought a ticket, and went inside. Is there supposed to be a dragon here? Hanna looked around in surprise. She had imagined a dragon museum differently, but in the middle of the room stood a large display case, and the mystery was quickly solved. Because the prepared dragon on display turned out to be a rather scraggly-looking caiman. A caiman is a type of small crocodile that typically lives in America. This caiman had apparently come to Mallorca on a ship many, many years ago and died on the beach. When the locals found it, some thought the animal was a dragon, and thus the legend was born. They quickly had the body preserved and displayed it in the museum, where many visitors could see it. Klaus was relieved. Putting his hand into a real dragon's mouth would certainly have been difficult. But now there was still the problem of how to get to the animal. A few museum guards were watching it like hawks, so opening the display case and just grabbing it was not an option. Fabio also looked around, but he was searching for something else. His stomach growled loudly. He hadn't eaten anything all day, and there seemed to be nothing in the museum, not even a vending machine. When he told Hanna he was hungry, she had an idea. She took Fabio by the hand and whispered to Klaus, "Wait here for us. We'll be right back." Next to the museum was one of the many Mallorcan tapas bars. Tapas are small bowls with many different delicacies. It could be fish, chicken, or meat, but also pickled vegetables or some spiked olives. The Mallorcans were very proud of their tapas, which were considered the best in all of Spain. Hanna immediately ordered a few dozen of the small, delicious dishes, which surprised Fabio a little. "I'm hungry, but what you've ordered is enough for 10 people. "That's the idea," Hanna grinned, packed the food in 2 huge bags, and pulled Fabio out of the bar with her. Over in the museum, Hanna wasted no time and set up the bowls with tapas right in the middle of the room. Then she spoke in pretty perfect Spanish. "Dear museum staff, we tourists just want to take a moment to thank you for all your hard work so that we can have a great vacation here. There are some small snacks. Please help yourselves." The Spanish employees had never experienced anything like it before. Although a few tourists occasionally thanked them for their work, most of them took it for granted that the Mallorcans were working while they were on vacation, which could be quite frustrating for the locals, and no one had ever laid out a wonderful tapas menu for them before. So they happily dug in as Hanna and Fabio filled their plates with tapas. Klaus could use this moment for himself, now that the museum guards were distracted. He quickly opened the box with a prepared caiman. It looked so lifelike that he almost didn't dare to reach into its mouth, even though he knew the body had been dead for decades. But then he pulled himself together, bravely reached into the animal's mouth and searched. At first he found nothing. But as he dug deeper, he could grab something small and round. He pulled his hand back and held a small black pearl between his fingers, which he quickly slipped into his pocket. Then he nodded at Hanna. Mission accomplished. Hanna gathered up the small bowls with the leftover tapas to take them back. In doing so, she only saw happy faces. Everyone was eating happily, and Hanna decided to thank the locals more often for their effort as a tourist in the future, because it was apparently worth it for everyone. When Klaus showed the small black pearl to the others, it quickly became clear they were dealing with another mystery. After all, pearls are found in the South Seas, not off the coast of Mallorca and the Mediterranean. Maybe Uncle Theo would know more about it. Besides, it was about time to check on him, and the hospital was just a few steps away. A few minutes later, they stood by his hospital bed. Unfortunately, Uncle Theo wasn't doing any better. His eyesight hadn't returned, and it didn't appear that would happen any time soon. At least he knew what the Black Pearl was all about, since he had gathered a lot of information about Mallorca over the past few weeks. This type of pearl was made in Mallorca, specifically at the pearl factory in Manacor, and that's exactly where our 3 friends were headed now. Manacor is located in the far east of Mallorca, and, with its over 40,000 inhabitants, is already a true city. One of the most famous Mallorcans of all time, the world-class tennis player Rafael Nadal, who everyone in Mallorca was very proud of, also hails from here. There was something else they were very proud of here, the Pearl Factory, which had existed since 1900. Of course, these were not real pearls that came from Manacor, but they were artfully made from shell sand and fish scales. They were beautiful to look at, and you could buy them on every corner. But how were these pearls supposed to help them find the giant? Since they couldn't visit the factory, Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio decided to explore the city first. But their pursuers were still hot on their trail. The 3 hermanos had now disguised themselves as street musicians. That way they could follow the children more inconspicuously, or rather, they could have followed them more inconspicuously if the Mallorcans didn't love street music so much. And so it happened that local passers-by stopped the 3 hermanos as they crossed the Plaza Constitucio, where fruits and vegetables were sold, and which was a popular meeting place for the residents, and wanted them to play a few songs. What else could the 3 do? Besides, they fancied themselves as great musicians, right? So they started to sing, but so out of tune and off-key that even the stray cats quickly scurried away. The vendors, fearing for their business with this racket, pelted them with anything they could get their hands on. Wilted lettuce, rotten apples, and finally even coconuts flew at the hermanos until they hurriedly fled. A career as singers, that much was certain, the hermanos could no longer hope for. But they didn't want that either. They were after the diamonds and the big money. They were all the happier when they saw Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio wandering through the streets. They had picked up the trail again and would not lose sight of the 3 anymore. However, at that moment, Klaus was also out of ideas. They had a black pearl and were at the place where these pearls were made. But how were they supposed to find the path to the giant with it? Just as they were about to give up and return to the hotel, Klaus discovered something. A very old tavern, which were called tabernas here in Mallorca. He pointed to the ancient wooden entrance door. Over there. Do you see that? Fabio didn't understand at first what Klaus meant. All he saw was another tapas bar. The place looks really great, but there's no way I can eat more tapas now. I've already had 8 in total, but Klaus meant something completely different. Just look at the name. The name was written in large letters above the entrance door. La Perla Negra. I don't speak Spanish like our Hanna does, Klaus continued, but doesn't that mean... La Perla Negra, Hanna interrupted him. That means the Black Pearl. And that's exactly why we're going to take a closer look at this place now. In a typical Spanish tavern, it's usually quite loud and cheerful. Spaniards, and particularly Mallorcans, love to eat their famous tapas until late at night and enjoy a glass or two of wine. Often, these tavernas are very old and have been run by the same family for generations. La Perla Negra was just such a tavern. The furnishings made of dark, heavy wood were probably ancient, yet it was clean and cozily furnished. The walls were adorned with countless photos, as well as paintings and drawings of Mallorcan landscapes from the region. And on one side of the dining room, a few dozen old hand-painted coats of arms hung on the wall. These were what the 3 children were looking at when a friendly waitress came by. Those were put up by my great-grandfather. The waitress, like many other service staff in Mallorca, spoke fluent German. He liked such coats of arms. Most of them he painted himself. Then you are the owner here? Exactly. I run the place with my sister. My great-grandfather Ramon opened the shop back then. The first house on the square. It still is. Hanna was impressed by the many antique pieces of furniture around her. Your great-grandfather would surely be proud of you. The woman laughed. He definitely would be. Even though he was considered quite crazy in town back in his day, he constantly told stories about some elves he knew, about wizards and fairies, and after a few glasses of wine, he would firmly claim to be friends with a giant. Well, Ramon lived to be over 100 years old and had a great life. At 2 other tables, a few guests waved. The woman looked around. Sorry, I have to take care of business. With that, she hurried to the neighboring tables, but Klaus had already heard enough. Now, everything makes sense. Hanna and Fabio looked at him questioningly. Great-grandfather Ramon. He really was friends with the giant. He knew where he lived but didn't want to reveal it to everyone for some reason. That's why he left the clue with the black pearl. The solution to the puzzle must be somewhere here in the store. Hanna and Fabio grinned. When Klaus got going, he was hard to stop. And he was right. There must be something in the tavern that could help them. It would be best if he had just drawn a map on the wall. Fabio had no idea where else to look. Maybe he did. We should take a closer look at the coats of arms. After all, he painted them himself. The 3 of them stood before the coats of arms. Each had something special. A golden crown, a large tree, crossed swords, a castle, typical coat of arms elements. Only one was relatively plain. It showed a cliff by the sea with a strange triangle open to the right at one point. This triangle is definitely odd, so out of place. That was true. Basically, it was just 2 lines meeting sharply on the right, nothing that usually belonged on a coat of arms, but suddenly it dawned on Klaus. Do you remember the math class last year? Not fondly, murmured Fabio. Math was not his forte. This little triangle, it's the mathematical symbol for greater. The lines are a cave system, and in the caves there is something greater. A giant, Fabio realized. Exactly, a giant. Hanna had already pulled out her smartphone and called up a map of the island's intricate cave systems. She quickly found the right one. Here, these caves perfectly match the picture on the coat of arms. They're right here near Porto P. The next morning, the children had hatched a plan. The caves near Porto P, which they wanted to explore in search of the giant, were firstly located in a nature reserve, meaning they were not allowed to enter them. Secondly, they could not be reached by land. The only way was from the sea. This meant they had to swim, and quite a distance too. The entrance to the cave was even half a meter underwater. I'd say there's no better hiding spot. No wonder the giant hasn't been found all these years. Klaus walked through a large shopping street in Palma, with Hanna and Fabio following him. But why does a giant hide for years? This question had been on Hanna's mind all morning, but Fabio just waved it off. That's not something we should worry about for now. We can ask him when we find him. His response was only logical. Sometimes Fabio just had the right attitude. Besides, they first needed to buy snorkeling gear, including fins. Although all three of them were really good swimmers, it seemed they had quite a distance to cover. But by now, the three hermanos also had a plan. They hired a boat to be able to follow the three children from a safe distance. They also loaded a few quite heavy boxes. Whatever was inside could not be seen, but it did spread quite a nasty smell. Now the moment of truth had come. Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio stood on the beach with their snorkeling gear on. Klaus looked around once more. So, I think we have to swim at least 800 meters. Maybe even 1,000? Do you think you can manage that? Sure, said Hanna. No sweat, added Fabio, but Hanna had one last objection. I don't want to paint the devil on the wall, but in this area you often hear about shark attacks. That's also one of the reasons why you shouldn't swim in the open sea. That's true, nodded Klaus, but the sharks only come if they're attracted. Luckily there is almost no one here, so we can probably be at ease. And so the three went into the water. But unfortunately, they did not count on the three hermanos, because they followed the kids in their wake with the boat, in such a way that they could not be seen. Slowly, it was clear where they wanted to go. The three headed towards a very particular cave. That was the moment the three hermanos had been waiting for. Time to get rid of the little ones, right? One of them grinned, the second one nodded. Then let's unleash our surprise. They opened the crates, and now it was clear what was inside. Fish scraps and a lot of bloody meat, very bloody meat. They knew that sharks, with their keen sense of smell, could detect the blood from miles away, and when they saw the three children, then they would surely be tempted by an even tastier morsel. And indeed, it took only a few minutes, and already they saw the first characteristic triangular fin, like those sharks have, quickly approaching the boat. Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio had no idea about all of this, of course. They only had about 200 meters left to swim to the cave entrance when Fabio noticed a shadow behind him, but he quickly realized from Hanna's eyes, wide with panic behind her diving mask, that it was probably more than just a shadow. Hanna surfaced with Klaus and Fabio following. And yes, Hanna was indeed panicked as she tore the mask from her head. "Sharks!" she shouted. "There are sharks coming!" "We must stay calm," Klaus shouted, though there was a hint of panic in his voice as well. "What can we do?" Fabio was the only one of the three who showed something like determination instead of panic. "Hit them," Klaus shouted. "Sharks have very sensitive noses. You have to hit them on the nose." Fabio didn't need to be told twice. He dove back underwater to see more clearly. And there they came. 2, no 3. Now, even 4 sharks began to circle him. They ignored Hanna and Klaus for the time being, as they remained still. Then the first shark attacked Fabio, but he was prepared, dodged the shark, and landed a full-force punch on its nose. Even though the punch was weakened underwater, the shark seemed to feel its effect. It quickly turned away. However, the other 3 now attacked, but Fabio had already switched to combat mode, just like the heroes in the action movies he always wanted to emulate. 3, 4, 5 times he struck, hitting the sharks on the nose again and again. After the first, 2 more had already retreated. They apparently weren't used to their prey fighting back so fiercely. This allowed Fabio to focus on the last and largest of the 3 sharks. It didn't just get one punch, but a whole combination of blows. That was enough. Even the last shark made a run for it. The 3 kids swam the last few meters towards the rocky coast, looking back repeatedly, but there was no trace of the sharks anymore. Panting and gasping for breath, Klaus, Hanna, and finally Fabio reached the shore. And Hanna threw her arms around Fabio's neck. "You are the greatest boxer of all time." The disappointed sharks, meanwhile, made their way to their next target, the boat of the three hermanos. Angrily, they circled the shaky vessel, even trying to ram it. In their panic, the hermanos stalled the engine twice, which seemed to only make the sharks wilder and angrier. Finally, the engine started, and in panic, the three retreated. Chasing the kids was out of the question now. They had no choice but to flee. Slowly and carefully, Klaus, Hanna, and Fabio explored the cave that grew larger before them. Then they came into a large room. Here, a huge pot hung over an even larger fire. "The pot is bigger than a car." Fabio was truly impressed. "This seems to be a giant's kitchen. Uncle Theo was really right." Klaus could hardly believe it himself. Hanna had an idea as she stood next to the pot. The rim of the pot towered over her by a few centimeters. "Come on, Fabio. Lift me up." Fabio did so, and now Hanna could take a look inside the pot. And this look reassured her enormously. Vegetable soup. The giant is a vegetarian? What did you think? Fabio didn't understand why it should be important. Well, in fairy tales, giants often eat little children and so on. If children were disappearing here, the whole island, and probably the entire world, would know. The giant wouldn't have lived here for so long if he were criminal or brutal or something. That reassured Hanna. "Then let's keep looking." Carefully, they felt their way forward in the darkness. The deeper they went into the cave, the darker it became. But still, everything here somehow looked inhabited. There was no driftwood lying around, no moss growing on the ceiling and walls, and there were no spiders or other creepy crawlies as you would normally find in damp caves. Clearly someone cleans here regularly. A few more steps, then Klaus and the other two also heard a sound. A long, recurring sound. And that's definitely snoring. Hanna had now shed her fear, and it was she who saw him first, the giant. He was easily 4 meters tall, and was sleeping deeply in front of them on a bed of leaves and pine branches. And now? Fabio was unsure of what to do. Is it wise to wake a sleeping giant? In any case, we didn't come all this way just to turn back now. So, shall we do it together? The other two nodded. "All right," said Klaus. "Then I'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3, and all three shouted together, 'Wake up!' The giant grumbled a little, stopped snoring, turned to their side, opened first one eye, then the second. Klaus and his friends held their breath in anticipation. What would happen now? Would the giant be hostile, aggressive? Would he even understand them? But what happened next was something the three of them couldn't have dreamed of, because the giant smiled kindly across his entire face and simply said, 'Hello, I am Nepomuk. Whom do I have the honor of speaking with?' At the same time, things were getting quite serious for Uncle Theo at the hospital. 3 doctors were standing by his bedside, looking quite puzzled. 'We should operate today. Even if the chances aren't good that you'll be able to see again after the surgery, it's better than doing nothing.' Uncle Theo sighed. 'I'd like to wait a bit longer.' 'We'd also like to wait and hope for a miracle,' replied the doctor, 'but I've put the best specialists on your case.' 'I've also got the best 3 specialists on my case, and I'm sure they'll succeed. Let's wait until tomorrow.' 'All right.' The doctor stood up and signaled to his colleagues. 'You're the boss.' At the door, he paused and turned around. 'Just out of curiosity, who are your 3 specialists?' Uncle Theo smiled as best he could with the bandages over his eyes. 'They're the 3 smartest and best kids one could wish for. Zrenia.' And these 3 children were now sitting on the bed of a real giant, chatting with him as if they were the oldest friends. Apparently, the giant was happy to finally have some company again. 'How did you find me?' 'Old Ramos left a few clues.' 'Oh yes, old Ramos. He was a really good friend of mine for life.' By now, Fabio had a question burning on his lips. Great-grandfather Ramos lived to be over 100 years old. How old are you? Giants never reveal their age, but I can tell you that we live to be very, very old." Hanna was curious too. "What do you do here all the time?" "What do I do? I hide. Do you have any idea what happens when a giant appears somewhere? One half of the people run away, the other half tries to kill you. In the past, when Ramos was still alive, he would occasionally bring friends who accepted me. But since his death, I've been sitting here all alone." That was, of course, very sad, and the children felt compassion for the giant. But the giant was also curious. "And why did you even look for me?" "Well," Klaus hesitated, "I have visions, and I saw that your tears can heal the blind. Our Uncle Theo is very sick. The eyes." "Well," said the giant, "that's true. Ramos used to bring sick people to me more often, whom I could heal with my tears. But unfortunately, that's no longer possible." The three children looked at each other in horror. Was Uncle Theo really lost now? Klaus was the first to find his voice again. "Have your healing powers dried up?" "Not my healing powers, but my tears have." The children looked at him questioningly. What did that mean now? But then the giant continued, "I live in Morocco in the mountains, together with my wife. One day, this terrible storm came, caught me while I was swimming in the sea. I clung to a tree trunk, and 4 days later I landed here on the beach, more dead than alive. I hid here in the caves, trying to somehow get home. But what should I do? Swim back? I haven't seen my wife in 100 years, and in my loneliness, I cried all the tears I had." Wow. That was pretty much the saddest story the kids had ever heard. Tears came to all three of them at once. Klaus already felt miserable if he couldn't see his friends and his aunt for a week. But 100 years? That was completely unimaginable. They were all silent, until Hanna had an idea. "This won't do. We have to change that." She didn't look sad anymore. She looked determined. "So, Mr. Nepomuk—" "Yes?" The giant looked at her. "Me, well, my father, we have a plane, quite nearby, and with that we'll take you home." The giant looked surprised. "Really?" Then Hanna jumped up, hugged the giant, as well as you can hug someone who's 4 meters tall. "I solemnly promise I'll take you home." The giant now looked really happy, but Hanna wasn't finished yet. "I promise. Tomorrow you'll see your wife again, and if you want, we can leave right away." Now the giant was completely overwhelmed. He looked at Hanna and hugged her too. That's the nicest thing anyone has ever done for me." And then it happened. Big tears rolled down the giant's face. Klaus looked astonished, whispered to Hanna, "Thought he had no more tears left." "These are tears of joy. He hasn't run out of those. Hurry up." Klaus knew what was meant. He took a small bottle, caught 2 of the tears, and put it away again. Hanna nodded at him. "Go quickly to the hospital to Uncle Theo. I'll stay here. Nepomuk and I need to get a plane." The 3 hermanos barely managed to return to shore with their boat at the same time, but as soon as they set foot on solid ground, several spotlights switched on. 3 police cars were already waiting for them. At first, the 3 hermanos acted completely innocent. "What's going on? Do you think we're smugglers?" But a determined-looking police officer confronted them. "You drove a motorboat through a protected environmental zone. The oil your engine leaks is damaging our wildlife. And as if that weren't enough, you've been dumping boxes of fish and meat waste. Are you out of your mind?" "We were chased by sharks and almost torn apart." This excuse didn't sound very convincing, so the officer pulled out his handcuffs. "Let's take you to a cell. There you'll be perfectly safe from dangerous sharks." And with that, the handcuffs clicked. For now, the career of the 3 hermanos, if they ever had one, was over. An hour later, Klaus and Fabio arrived at Uncle Theo's hospital. Carefully, they removed the bandage. His eyes still looked severely damaged. Then Klaus took out his little bottle, dripped some of the giant's tears first into Uncle Theo's left eye, and then into the right. "Now?" Fabio looked at Klaus questioningly, but he just shrugged his shoulders. "I have no idea what's going to happen now." But they didn't have to wait too long. Uncle Theo blinked a few times. His pupils moved right and left, and he whispered, "I can see again. I can see again." And then he shouted out loud with joy, "I can see again." By now, it had become dark on Mallorca, but Hanna could still make out the silhouette of her father's plane at the airport. As planned, the giant had left his cave under the cover of night, along with Hanna, walked to the nearby airfield, and climbed over the barricade fence. A 2-meter fence was really no obstacle for him. Hanna found him a safe spot in the cargo hold where he could hide. The giant could hardly wait. He would see his wife again the very next day. The next day at takeoff, Hanna's father was a bit puzzled. Apparently, they had loaded a few 100 kilos more cargo onto his plane than planned. But that didn't matter. His Antonov could easily handle it. Besides, Hanna bombarded him with questions about flying throughout the entire flight, so he couldn't even start pondering. The cargo was supposed to be unloaded in Morocco the next morning right before the return flight, so he didn't have much to do with it anyway. Therefore, there was no reason to worry about a few extra kilos on board. Moreover, he enjoyed the father-daughter time too much to be concerned, and of course, Hanna was happy as well. Her plan seemed to be working perfectly. Hours after landing in Morocco, even before dawn, Hanna's father was asleep in the airplane cockpit. He needed to be rested for the return flight. Meanwhile, in complete darkness, Hanna and the giant sneaked out of the airplane. Nobody could see them as they hurried across the tarmac of the small airport. Apparently, the giant knew exactly where he needed to go, even though he hadn't been home in a long time. After about half an hour of walking, which was quite tiring for Hanna, since she had to take at least 2 steps for each of the giants, he seemed to have arrived. He cupped his hands around his mouth like a funnel and let out a deep, long call. Then again, and suddenly a very similar call came from nearby, where a cave was visible. And indeed, a head peeked out from the cave. The head of a female giant. Now Hanna could no longer keep up with her giant. He ran off, and his wife ran towards him. Finally, the two were able to embrace, kissed each other, and were beside themselves with joy. Over his wife's shoulder, the giant whispered a thank you towards Hanna, the sign that she could now return to the airplane before her father woke up. Hanna waved once more to the happy couple, and this time it was she who shed tears of joy. Then she finally made her way home. A few days later, Hanna and Klaus knocked on Fabio's door at his boarding school. Fabio was surprised to see them. They usually announced their visits beforehand, but before he could say anything, they shouted, "Surprise!" Hanna had crafted a large trophy and painted it gold. In silver letters, it read, "For Fabio's victory in the greatest boxing match of all time." Fabio was touched and didn't know what to say. He didn't have to, because Klaus said, "To us, you are the greatest fighter of all time. When it really matters, you would even take on a pack of sharks without hesitation. I know no one else who would dare such a thing." Then they took a photo of Fabio with his trophy. This photo would hang in Fabio's room for many, many years, as a reminder of the greatest fight of his life. The end of the story? But not quite final. Where does it continue with Klaus Bekker and his adventures? Of course, here with Klaus Bekker. Come on, let's jump into the next adventure.